Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. On the program, we return to our All Things Africa edition, our journey across the continent and looking at the history and current affairs of each nation. We're still on West Africa, and we now explore the West African country of Mali. And who better to teach us about this country or any African country than our returning champion, the brilliant historian and journalist and activist Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire, and also frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports, who will be our guide on this trip to Mali's history and current affairs. So first off, Abayomi, as always, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for your ongoing interest in the African continent.
Well, likewise, it's always an honor to have you and real privilege to have you on, always as our history church, as our history teacher. So
Okay,
so thank you for that, Abayomi. And
great.
as always, folks, please do donate generously, not just to Pan African Newswire Black Agenda Report, but please donate generously if you can to One Plus One. Share all of our content, past and present. Help us overcome the far right algorithms and help us overcome the monopoly Western corporate media and state media has on us. And One Plus One is still facing a lot of issues, still unable to share widely the content. So again, folks, if you do like One Plus One, you don't want to see One Plus One stop doing what it's doing, please share widely all of our content at all of the various social medias. Okay, on to the topic at hand. So, Abiome, as always, tell us as always, tell us what was Mali like before French colonization, and when France did colonize Mali, what were the conditions of the people?
First of all, the region is the history of the region is closely interrelated to other countries that we've discussed in the past. That is, of course, Niger. And they, of course, have a very close relationship in regard to history as it relates to Mali. In regard to human settlements, they date back at least 300,000 years before the Christian era. There was the Wanjugu sites there, which go back tens of thousands of years. These were human settlements during what is described as the Stone Age of human history. There's been a discovery of factories that manufactured stone tools. And based upon that evidence, which is becoming clear, it shows that this region of the world has a long history that goes back hundreds of thousands of years. And in regard to the more modern period of history, we talked about the rise of the three major kingdoms or empires in West Africa. That was, of course, the Ghana Empire, later followed by the Mali Empire and then the Songhai Empire. The Mali Empire, which modern day Mali is named afterwards, came after Ghana, after the decline of Ghana and the overtaking of that kingdom became the Kingdom of Mali with Sundiata Keita. It is noted as peaking around the time of Mansa Musa in the early part of the 14th century. It was a state, an empire, a kingdom which expanded during its heyday. It was heavily involved in trade. It was a principal component of the trans-Saharan trade, which involved gold, salt, and other commodities with other peoples, societies, and kingdoms and empires throughout West Africa, extending into North Africa. So this is very important to understand that despite the propaganda that Africa really had no history prior to the coming of European enslavement and colonialism, this is totally false. And the archaeologists and historians are uncovering so many different clues and artifacts that prove that these stories were complete lies, complete fabrications. The Wanjugu sites are related to many aspects of ancient Malian history. We could talk about the Dogon country, which more research is being done into that, shows how extensive the history of the Dogon actually is. And these sites are being excavated. Nonetheless, with the instability that's been taking place in Mali over the last 13 or more years, some of the excavation had to be abandoned due to these rebel groups that have been involved in disrupting governmental functions, tearing up villages and other human habitats, housing, former institutions such as the in fact the university that was there, Sankore, the ancient Timbuktu city. A lot of these have been under threat because of the ongoing instability that's been taking place inside of Mali. From the Stone Age, we go into the Iron Age, and we had the city of Dia, which is a very, very important area. And it was settled, it is estimated somewhere between 900 BC and 600 BCE. 900 BCE up until the point of 600 BCE. So we're talking about well over 2,000 years, 2,500, if not more, years, where we had human settlements and cities that showed aspects of what today is considered civilization, stratification of society. You had the manufacture first of stone tools and later iron with the smelting of iron, and the development of human settlements, city-states, and eventually empires, which reached their fruition beginning around the 4th, 5th century AD, and then later going into other higher forms of societal structures. We talked about Ghana, Mali, of course, and Songhai, but there were others as well, other kingdoms, city-states that existed in that area.
Fascinating. And how how did Mali become colonized by France, and what were the conditions of the people when France colonized Mali?
There was a tremendous amount of resistance during the Atlantic slave trade and the onslaught of French imperialism. They were instrumental in conquering areas. For example, the previous kingdom or empire that took over after the Songhai Empire, which of course came from Morocco. Those were the people who eventually overcame the people in further south in the Songhai Empire. They, during that particular time period, they in fact were very instrumental in trade, transatlantic trade. But this attracted the French. The French eventually came in. They attempted to divide the various peoples and groups within these kingdoms and empires. And eventually, by the conclusion of the 19th century, France had set up their own system of colonialism. Now, prior to that, France was heavily involved in the Atlantic slave trade. We know this because of all the people that were taken out of the area to the North American territories, and also to South America and the Caribbean. Haiti is a great example, or Hispaniola, which was probably the most profitable colony in history, slave colony in history. And when France lost that after the revolution between 1791 and 1803, they were forced to sell off a lot of their holdings within the continental North American region, the so-called Louisiana Purchase, which took place in 1803.
Yes, yeah.
So this strengthened the U.S. expansion from the Northeast and the Southeast into the South and eventually to the Southwest. So the competition between France and the United States and France and Britain was instrumental in the whole historical development of colonialism and imperialism. So by the 1890s, France was poised to take control of these areas as colonies. But as I mentioned before, there was resistance that took place. One that comes to mind is Samori Touré. He was a Malian, Guinean resistance fighter who had fought France for many, many years. He leveled a lot of defeats against the French. Nonetheless, due to their overwhelming military might and the failure of Samori Touré to form an alliance, an anti-European alliance, anti-colonial alliance with those who were being attacked by the British, for example, the Ashanti people in the Gold Coast. They collapsed started to collapse during the 1890s. So this hampered what Samori Touré wanted to do in terms of form a region-wide alliance to stave off colonialism. Samori Touré, of course, eventually was captured. He was exiled to several different locations. He eventually died in Gabon in 1900 from pneumonia. But he goes down in history as one of the anti-colonial fighters. His work, his representation indicates clearly that African people did fight against the onslaught of European colonialism. And that's very, very important for us to emphasize, in all of these discussions. It's very, very important for us to emphasize that. So yes, Samori Touré was a major leader. So what the French did, they ruled various parts of Africa as block territories. You had the French Empire of West Africa, which existed. And then you had the breaking up of these territories into colonies. And that took place in the Southwest. We talked about what happened in Congo, Brazzaville. We talked about different areas of the region. Niger, for example, Gabon, we discussed those. So the whole idea was divide and conquer, divide and rule. And that's what happened up until about 1900, when they consolidated their colonial rule. And after consolidating their colonial rule, of course, they ruled up until the period of the Second World War. What happened during the Second World War, which we discussed earlier, was that the Germans came in and took over France. So there was a split between the French people, some that acquiesced, to Hitler's drive in France, and then there were others who formed the resistance. Some were communists and anti-capitalists. Others were pro-capitalist and pro-imperialist. In 1944, they had a conference of the Free French Republic, and it took place in Brazzaville. And we talked about de Gaulle's visit and his speeches and so forth. Then there was a reconfiguration of the French colonial system after World War II. They wanted to make it more liberal, more accommodating to the oppressed people. And this went on between 1944 up until about 1958. In 1958, under de Gaulle, he came up with a scheme for creating a new republic that would incorporate the former colonies into this new reconfigured French Republic. Guinea, where Ahmed Sékou Touré became the first president. And Ahmed Sékou Touré is a descendant. It is said he is the great-grandson of Samori Touré, who fought against the French during the latter part of the 19th century. So yes, they rejected it in 1958, but there was also organizing taking place in other former French colonies. The African Democratic Rally, or the Rassemblement Démocratique Africain, the RDA, which had affiliates in a lot of the French-speaking countries in West Africa. And the president of the RDA eventually became a man by the name of Modibo Keita. Now, Modibo Keita became the first president of an independent Mali in 1960. He was a Pan-Africanist. He was a leftist. As early as the late 1940s, early 1950s, he had been involved in a Marxist or communist study group that was launched at the aegis of the Communist Party of France. Also, He was a school teacher. He was involved in cultural productions, one of the co-founders of the theater group in West Africa, which existed among the former French colonies. So he was a very active person. He was a leftist, a Pan-Africanist, and he came into office in 1960. He came in after the collapse of what was called the Mali Federation, which was an alliance between the so-called French Sudan, which was the name that was given Mali prior to independence, and Senegal. Senegal at the time, the dominant political figure became Leopold Sédar Senghor, the poet. But he was a strong proponent of neo-colonialism under French direction. So they maintained a lot of French influence in Senegal, but in Mali after 1960, you had the collapse of the Federation. Then after the Federation collapsed, Mali demanded their own independent existence, and that's what happened.
Was it a peaceful transfer of power, or one that required a lot of violent struggle?
There had been a struggle during the 19th century. During the 20th century, there were mass demonstrations, mass organizations that were formed. But no, there was not, in that part of the country, was not an armed struggle in the same sense that you had in places like Cameroon and also in Algeria. We talked about Cameroon earlier.
Yeah.
The fact that they did wage an armed struggle there under the UPC, the Cameroonian People's Union, and the leadership of that party, of course, Liberation Movement and political party, were liquidated by the French. So in 1959, preparations were underway to declare independence. That happened in 1960. And then the ruling party in Mali in those early years, headed by Modibo Keita, was known as the SURDA, the Sudanese Union and the Rassemblement Démocratique Africain, the SURDA. That was the ruling party, and it was a one-party state. It was socialist oriented. Yeah. They had a situation where they nationalized a lot of the industries and sectors of the economy. Immediately in 1960, when Mali became independent, they formed a union with the Republic of Ghana under Kwame Nkrumah and the Republic of Guinea, Conakry, under Ahmed Sékou Touré. So initially you had the Ghana-Guinea Union, which was formed in 1958 after Guinea gained its independence. And then when Mali got its independence, they expanded it to the Ghana-Guinea-Mali Union. That was in 1960. So they were already on the road to forming a union of African states. And they started out in West Africa, but eventually by 1963, you had the formation of the Organization of African Unity. The OAU was a compromise from the standpoint that you had a split within the independent African states in 1961, largely centered around what was happening in Congo. The overthrow of Patrice Lumumba, his kidnapping, his torture, his execution caused a huge rift within the independent African states. And you had what was known as the Casablanca group, which was more left and anti-imperialist, against the Monrovia and Brazzaville groups, which believed in gradualism and regionalism. So this was the division that had taken place leading up to 1962, 1963. Then in 63, on May 25th, the Organization of African Unity was formed. Although if you read their program, the initial charter of the OAU sounds quite progressive. But the whole question of how do you get to that point? How do you get unity? How do you destroy imperialism on the African continent? How do you merge the various economies and military apparatuses of the country? This is where the divisions took place, even among the progressive forces. For example, there was a dispute between Julius Nyerere of the United Republic of Tanzania and Kwame Nkrumah. Mm-hmm. Nkrumah believed in immediate unification. The formation of the United States of Africa, whereas Nyerere believed in a more gradual and regional approach to African unity. Although he said, he was for total unification of Africa. So it's quite interesting that Mali, Guinea, and Ghana were at the vanguard during this particular time period of the African Revolution. They continued this process until you started having these pro-Western coups d'etats. In 1966, it happened in Ghana. And then in 1968,
yes. In fact, that's actually
overthrown. In fact, yeah, right. Go ahead.
In fact, that's a perfect segue to this question. Now, actually, before
Modibo
talking
Keita
about
was overthrown, in 1968,
yeah, but before you talk a bit about that, talk to us just a bit more about his. I guess one could say was mostly a positive legacy in terms of his African socialism and his one-party state of socialism. So talk to us about that, and then talk to us about Mali under the military dictatorship of Masua Jory. And then with that, talk to us about Mali's history during the Cold War and what was Mali's place during the Cold War. What was its relations with other Western imperial nations, namely the U.S. and France, and its relations with the USSR and the communist socialist bloc of Eastern Europe and so forth.
Yes, Mali was a strong proponent of non-alignment, and Nkrumah was a co-founder of the non-aligned movement in 1961. Now, in later years, Nkrumah said that there was no middle way between socialism and capitalism or neo-colonialism and outright communism. That's what he said by 1968. Nonetheless, at that time period, we're talking about 1960, 1961, when discussions were going on around the formation of the non-aligned movement between Indonesia, India, Egypt, and the others. They believed that they could serve as a deterrent against nuclear war by taking a non-aligned position because they constituted the overwhelming majority of people in the world. If you talk about the non-aligned movement, even today, it's a formidable
still exists, force. Yeah.
Internationally, it still exists. It's chaired by Uganda, Youri Museveni, which is interesting as well. But at the same time, it still exists. The movement has still been going on for the last nearly 65 years. But at the same time, they had close ties with the socialist camp, Nkrumah, as well as the leader of Mali, Modibo Keita. In fact, at one point he received the Lenin Peace Prize, so did Kwame Nkrumah received the Lenin Peace Prize. So yeah, they were definitely in alliance with the socialist camp. Ghana had very close relations with China, so did Guinea, as well as Mali. At the same time, though, because they were non-aligned, they also wanted to maintain good relations with the United States and the Western imperialist countries. This was a contradiction, and eventually it did undermine their governance. For example, Kwame Nkrumah traveled to the United States on several occasions. In 1958, he spoke at the United Nations. In 1960, he came again and spoke at the United Nations. In 1961, he came here when John F. Kennedy had just been in office for about 3 months to discuss the situation in Congo, trying to reach some type of solution to the situation in Congo to prevent the total disintegration of the state and the partitioning of the state. And the partitioning had already taken place under Moise Tshombe in the so-called Katanga region in the southern part of Congo. So when Nkrumah came here, I believe it was in April of 1961, he had extensive discussions with John F. Kennedy. From what I've read in terms of people who were there during this particular time period, they said that Kennedy and his administration wanted to talk about the Volta Dam project, which they had agreed to assist Ghana to build, the Akosombo Dam project, which was a project to increase hydroelectric power in Ghana and throughout the entire region of West Africa. The reports that I read is that Nkrumah refused to discuss that project on that trip. All he wanted to talk about was how do we resolve the situation in the former Belgian Congo. So it really didn't go all that well.
Yeah.
And whether or not he returned to the United States during that period is highly, during his last 5 remaining years in office, is highly questionable. And his relationship with Kennedy, although there are documents of them exchanging letters and platitudes and all that, but in 1963, Kennedy, of course, was assassinated. Lyndon Johnson took over, of course. And after that, in 1965, Nkrumah had proposed a trip to Vietnam in an effort to try to negotiate some type of ceasefire. He had communicated this to the Johnson administration. They said they would not in any way interfere with his trip. Yet, as soon as he left on February the 24th of 1966, they set in motion a coup d'etat to overthrow his government, which had been planned for a number of years. Then in 1968, Modibo Keita was overthrown by his lower-ranking military officers, just like what happened in Ghana 2.5 years before. So he was overthrown and imprisoned, Modibo Keita. He was imprisoned because there was some decline in the economic situation inside of Mali leading up to the coup in November of 1968. Similar situation in Ghana leading up to the coup in 1966, where there were some goods that were not available in the country. Ghana had reached out to try to get a loan from the International Monetary Fund. But before all that could materialize, the government was overthrown. Similar situation happened in Mali 2.5 years later. So that ousted the government of Modibo Keita. And he was overthrown by a colonel, Musa Traore. And Traore came in, he banned the SURDA, the sole political party inside the country, and it became a no-party state, became a dictatorship, and that's how he ruled the country largely up until about the mid-1970s. He tried to make some changes in how the country was ruled, but
apparently, in the research I did, he apparently he overturned a lot of the socialist policies of
exactly.
Yes, so he overturned a lot of so he overturned a lot of the positive socialist policies of let me read his name again.
Modibo
Keita. Keita. But interesting enough, when I was doing some research, I asked the Google AI search services of whether Traore and other military dictators, whether they were far right, and they actually said that no, they were not. They were not far right, but they were definitely dictatorships that only served out of self-interest. And regardless of some of the nice platitudes, we're here to govern for all of Mali. Of course, it's not how they governed. So yeah. Talk to us a little bit about his legacy before we get into the person who replaced him.
Yeah, well, Musa Traore came to power in 1968, and in 1977, there were rumors about the potential for a national reconciliation government. Although Modibo Keita was in prison, his health was deteriorating. He was transferred to Bamako, which is the national capital in the southern part of Mali, but he died prior to any effort to build a national government of reconciliation. And there was suspicion that he may have been killed in order to prevent him from being released from prison, because he was a very charismatic, very articulate political leader. He still had a lot of support among people in the country. and particularly among the youth. So after he died, there was demonstrations by students and others thinking that his death was part of a plot to extend the rule of Musa Traore, who did rule for another decade and a half, up until he ruled all the way up until 1991, 1990, 1991, when there was a general uprising in the country, which followed the pattern that we discussed before.
Yeah.
Of the demand for multi-party democracy, but really it was a spontaneous, to a certain extent, revolt against neo-colonial rule. Because what had happened was that the progressive leaders in West Africa, coming out of the 1950s and 1960s, had been removed, or those who were progressive were not able to take power. For example, in Senegal, you had Senghor, who became the leader of that country. You had in Cote d'Ivoire, it was the leader of that country, Houphouët Boigny. These people were very closely aligned with France. They believed in French alliance with the post-colonial African states. And they believed in having French military forces stationed in their countries to stave off any attempt at a military coup or any type of uprising coming from the bottom, from below and within society.
Safe to say
So,
that Traore was very much, I mean, according to the Googles, that he wasn't far right, but very much was believed in neo-colonialism or some kind of an African capitalism for the people of Mali.
exactly, I would say that. Yeah, I would definitely say that. And yeah, but they still did send students on the scholarships to the former Soviet Union and other places.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a friend of mine, in fact, who lived with me way back early 1980s when I was a graduate student, was from Mali. And he had grown up, during that period of the independence era. He witnessed the military coup d'etat in 1968. And he was awarded a scholarship to study engineering, shipbuilding engineering, in the former Soviet Union. And then he wound up in the United States 1979, 1980, studying at the University of Michigan.
Fascinating.
But the point I'm making is that in the early 90s, there was these uprisings that were taking place in various countries in West Africa. And as a result of that, you had another coup d'etat, which resulted in the removal of Musa Traore, and then a series of civilian leaders who came to power through multi-party elections, who were supported by France and the United States. And fundamentally, there was no real political or economic change in Mali between the early 1990s all the way up until around 2012.
Before we get there, so yes, as you mentioned, Moussa Traore himself, he was ousted in the military coup. Mali was then led by Amadou Toumani Touré.
Right. Yes.
Talk to us a bit more about his legacy and how did Mali fare after the Cold War ended, when it was the unipolar world dominated by the U.S. And talk to us a bit more about how France still maintains quite a neo-colonial relation with Mali, correct?
Yeah, they did. And despite, the fact that the military dictatorships of Traore was overthrown, largely from the bottom, even though it was a military coup that took him out of office, it was a lot of discontent among the masses, particularly among the youth during that time period. But the people who did take over maintained very close ties with France. They did not move back towards any type of socialist orientation. We have to remember, this was the early 1990s, during the 1990s, a period when you had all this propaganda about the end of history.
Yeah.
That the unipolar war was here to stay. Once the Soviet Union had collapsed, once the Comecon countries in Eastern Europe had collapsed, we had the special period in Cuba where the support and partnership with the Soviet Union and the Eastern European socialist countries was no more. And the Cuban people underwent a lot of suffering during that particular time period. So there was a lot of propaganda during the 1990s about, communism failed, it didn't work. All the best people can do is look forward. Best they can look forward to is capitalism and imperialism.
and
So,
in fact, with the exception of, I believe, New Zealand and Australia, which were both ruled by very, hard right, neoliberal governments, the Liberal National Coalition.
right.
New Zealand, it was the National Party. The U.S., it was under Clinton, who had moved the Democrats. Although one could argue that the Democrats were always sort of center right, but he really governed very much like a right wing Democrat and so forth like that. Canada, the Liberal Party had very much shifted to the right as well under the Liberal Party. And Labour, again, I would always argue that Labour was center right, but certainly under the Tony Blair, it was very much like forget nationalization, forget any kind of socialism and so forth. We accept the free market, and whatnot like that. And even with and then yeah, and same thing with both France and Germany. Although maybe not as hard to the right as their counterparts, but they very much embrace neoliberalism. Certainly, the SPD with the Greens in Germany and France under under Mitterrand was
Mhm.
certainly starting to make some concessions to the business community and so forth like that. And if they didn't make concessions to the business community, they certainly knew that, okay, that means we have to exploit
Right.
way more
Exactly. Hmm.
Africa and quote unquote former colonies. Correct.
Yeah. So yes, Amadou Toumani Touré wound up serving 2 terms in office, and like I said, it was not a progressive period in West African history. The only exception was the revolution in Burkina Faso in 1983, which lasted for 4 years under Captain Thomas Sankara. And this
Yes,
provided a
yes, yes,
bright light
yes.
for that period because what you had in 1984 was the overthrow of the government of the PDG in Guinea under Ahmed Sékou Touré, which many argue had shifted, at least to the center, not quite to the right, but they did made efforts in Guinea, starting in the late 70s to the up to the point of the death of Ahmed Sékou Touré, to quote normalize unquote relations with France as well as the United States. And Sékou Touré came to the States in 1979. He came again in 1982. And then, of course, he died in 1984. Here in the United States, interestingly enough, they said he had a heart attack in Saudi Arabia, and he was transported to a clinic in Cleveland for heart surgery, and he died during that period. And then, of course, after he died, there was a military coup by lower ranking officers in 1984, late April 1984. And since that time period, we're talking about 41 years. There's not been any resurfacing of any type of left wing, Pan Africanist, socialist oriented government in Guinea Conakry either. And the same situation went on in Mali as well during the 1990s, during the 2000s. Then, of course, in 2012, there
Actually,
was,
actually, actually,
yeah, okay,
actually, before we get to that, actually, but
okay,
I think we're almost on there. So yeah,
yeah.
so talk to us about Mali's history during the early 2000s and 2010s, and Mali under specifically the leadership of Amadou Senghor. How do you assess the legacy of these heads of states that ruled Mali during this decade, like Dion Kondo Traore, who interestingly was a member of the party Alliance for Democracy in Mali, which, at least on paper, they are
Mhm.
supposed to be center left, and their ideology is supposed to advocate social democracy, democratic socialism, and Pan Africanism on the left spectrum. And they are members of Socialist International. Again, we can always argue how Socialist, that's institution is since it's dominated by Western. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But another leader who was twice president and head of state of Mali during that time was Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, whose party is Rally for Mali. And again, they on paper are supposed to be advocates of social democracy, their ideology center left, and also members of Socialist International. Talk to us about that period.
Yeah, well, there was another flare up during the early 1990s with the Tuareg people in the northern part of the country. This was a unresolved colonial demarcation of the country. There was an attempt of some type of rebellion during the early 1960s, which was crushed under the leadership of Modibo Keita. And then this resurfaced again in the 1990s. There was a negotiated settlement to that particular incident that was led by Algeria. And then, of course, later, it flared up again after the overthrow of the Gaddafi government in Libya in 2011. And then 2012, there was another flare up of the Tuareg people and their fight for some type of autonomy, if not independence. And there was a notion of an independent country in the northern part of Mali, but it has not materialized as of yet. But this is an ongoing conflict that's been going on now for about 6.5 decades. So yeah, the Azawad Liberation Organization was involved during that particular time period. Then there were other groups that surfaced as well, pro-Islamist organizations, which really began to dominate even within the area involving the Tuareg people. But the Tuaregs, are a group that's been in Africa for centuries, and they have, of course, been divided from the African people who live in the central and southern part of the country, even the northern part of the country. So that conflict has not been resolved as of yet. And we're talking about from the early 1960s to the early 1990s to 2012, and also over the last 13 years. It still has not been resolved, and there's still fighting, internal turmoil that's going on in northern Mali in particular.
And even though you've had these three heads of states, which have been part of parties, which on paper are supposed to be left-wing parties, they've not really advocated any type of policies that overnight would help out the majority African poor, even those who do have a job but live very much a destitute life and so forth.
Yes, that's the case, and the natural resources of the country, which is principally gold, the utilization of that resource has not benefited the overwhelming majority of the people inside of Mali itself. So that's why you have so much discontent, even within the military itself, among the masses of people, particularly the young people, and that is continuing up until this day.
Perfect segue to this question.
Okay.
So talk to us about Mali presently. So in 2020, Ibrahim Boubacar Keita was ousted in a military coup. He passed away in January. Actually, passed away in January 2020, I believe, and he was 76 years old. He died in exile, I believe, and
Mm.
power was held first, if I'm not mistaken, by Assimi Gota, and then briefly from 2020 to 2021, Ban Nidjwa. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing his name correctly. And then he was overthrown by Assimi Gota again. What led to all of this, and what has been Mali's response during what I call the African Spring in recent years in the Sahel and parts of West Africa, which has been rebelling primarily against French neo-colonialism. And then my follow-up question to that is, as a Pan Africanist leftist yourself
Mhm.
and anti-imperialist, which is at the core of Pan-Africanism. What's been your assessment, and what should be the response of fellow Pan-Africanist leftists, people who do solidarity work with Africa, and anti-imperialists more broadly to what's currently going on in
Mhm.
Mali?
Yeah, a lot of the turmoil in recent years has been centered around the fact that the Malian military and the state have not been able to protect the majority of the people who live in areas that are contested.
Yeah,
So that is why the military used that as a rationalization or justification for seizing power in 2020. But they had seized power earlier in 2012 under Captain Sanogo, who in fact had been a collaborator with the French Foreign Legion, as well as the United States Africa Command. In fact, he was had even studied at a war college in the United States. Uh, so all of these leaders in recent years have had close ties with AFRICOM and also the so-called G5, Group of Five, and the another group called the another group that was called what was it called? It was a group of West African countries who were allied with France. The Group of Five
yeah.
is one of them. Yeah.
ECOWAS, I believe.
Well, ECOWAS is a 16-member state of West African countries, which the Alliance of Sahel states had withdrawn
Okay.
last year. But yes, they have been a part of this alliance with France under the guise of combating terrorism.
Yeah.
Well, where did the terrorism come from? You know, in 2011, you had the overthrow of the government in Libya, and a lot of the people from there fled into Mali, even Tuaregs and others. And then you had the unleashing of these jihadist groups there in early 2012. So this prompted a coup d'etat then. And then, of course, that led to the establishment of a civilian government under Keita. He was overthrown in 2020. And then there was another attempt to have a government, an interim government, and that did not result in any improvement in the security situation. So Assimi Goita overthrew that government as well, the one in 2021 under Mbao. Endowed, yeah. So what happened was they overthrew those governments. They came under a tremendous amount of pressure from ECOWAS, from France, and other countries who imposed sanctions on them, expelled them, or at least suspended them from the Economic Community of West African States, which had been formed way back in, I believe, 1975. It was formed. 75, yeah, 73 or 75. And people like Sekou Touré and others were involved in the formation of the Economic Community of West African States. But at the same time, it became, in essence, another neo-colonial construct
Okay.
to facilitate good relations between France, the NATO countries, the United States, and so forth. So, yeah, that happened in 2012. There was a coup d'etat, then another civilian government. Assimi Goita took over. He too had close ties with France as well as the United States through their military apparatuses. And Operation Berkane was the name of another operation that the French had coordinated ostensibly to enhance security in the West Africa region. So after 2021, Assimi Goita has been in power. There have been a lot of pressure on him from outside to come up with some type of transitional program to return to civilian rule, but it has not happened as of yet. And now they are part of the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES, along with Burkina Faso and Niger. So
And are
that could,
they and are they so far trying to advocate policies which are very left wing, and that's why that's why for example, my mother, I wish she didn't watch French corporate media and French state media and so forth, but she does. And sometimes when she's not watching that, she will often watch BBC's Africa coverage, CNN's Africa coverage, and
Focus
she
on Africa and all that. Yeah, right.
and she was saying to me last week when I was preparing for this that
Yeah.
the current dictator of Mali is absolutely crazy. He's in bed with Islamists and so forth. He has no idea what he's doing and so forth. So and so I thought to myself, okay, that's very interesting. And I know she's watching French and Western corporate media and state media. So that's why I have to ask you
Yeah.
what's your assessment, and where should anti-imperialists where should they lie when it comes to the current state of Mali, or the current or the ongoing political crisis in Mali?
Yeah, I think that anti-imperialists have no choice except to give tactical or either critical support to the military government in Mali, because at this point, it is standing up against the Islamists. And those Islamist groups, as we've talked about before, have their origins in Western intelligence. And they have expelled French troops. They've told the Americans to leave. And they've joined with two other states, along with the the former USSR, the Russian Federation, to form an alliance of Sahel states. And they have stood their ground against the pro-French elements, both within those countries as well as throughout the entire region and internationally. So in that sense, I think we have no choice except to support them and defend them against the attacks by France and the United States. And those attacks are ongoing. Whether they are perfect, it's a perfect arrangement. No, I wouldn't say it's a perfect arrangement at all. But at the same time, the civilian governments that were there before did next to nothing to combat the insurgency that is probably Western backed in all likelihood. And they have not done anything in terms of improving the living standards of people inside the country. They maintain a very close ties with France. For example, the incident that occurred in France not maybe 8 years ago, where someone walked into a publication and gunned down some people there, and it was a big outrage throughout France.
You're talking about the Charlie Hebdo massacre.
Yes, right. The guy who was the president of Mali at the time went all the way to Paris to march, right alongside the French leadership and others in defense of the French imperialists. It's pretty bizarre situation, but that's what happened. Even though France has never expressed any apologies or any remorse in regard to all the Africans that were massacred by them during the colonial period. Even during World War II, there was a huge massacre in Senegal. And eventually they did recognize just recently that it took place, but they've never attempted to make any amends to the families and the communities of those people who were massacred there during World War II. So yes.
And in fact, actually, continue. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make the point that the civilian governments that were there, that came into power after the uprisings of the early 1990s calling for multi-party democracy, maintained very close ties with imperialism. So what is there to defend in regard to civilian rule? Same situation in Niger with Mahmoud Bazoum, who
on paper also was supposed to be a leftist.
Yeah, right. But he obviously was backed by the U.S. and France, and he was overthrown. And people don't seem to be that excited about bringing him back. The people in Niger, same situation with the civilian leaders in Mali. Now, in Mali, there has been opposition groups that have demonstrated, that have protested, calling for the return of civilian rule. But until the security situation improves, I really don't see uh, a lot of pressure in that regard in terms of having multi-party elections, internationally supervised elections to bring a civilian government back to power. So we'll have to see what happens in the coming period.
Well, it's interesting. So a lot of the Islamic terrorist attacks that or extreme Islamic terrorist attacks that happened in Mali. So a lot of that happened after the disastrous overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi and all the different
Yes,
crazy Islamist factions went at each other's throats. So a lot of the terrorism that happened in other African countries, namely Mali, happened after the overthrow of Gaddafi. Then,
yes, it escalated tremendously. And
but
not only in Mali, but also in Burkina Faso and Niger, yes, as well.
so interesting enough, doesn't that actually show? Because across the continent of Africa, whether you were of the soft left, the far right, the center right, all different political spectrums and so forth. A lot of those countries, in fact, the African Union, they all warned the West, do not overthrow Gaddafi. It's going to be not only disastrous for Libya, but it's going to be a humanitarian catastrophe for the continent, because a lot of these Islamist groups, they didn't explicitly say you guys are supporting ISIS, you guys are supporting radical Islam in Libya, but they did explicitly say that you are going to cause a lot of chaos when it comes to radical Muslim elements coming into our countries and so forth. So
Yes.
so ironically, if had France, which was a partner in crime in the overthrow of Gaddafi, had they not done that, you would not have had all of these Islamist groups, the inability of the Malayan government to fight them, which then, of course, led to the coups, and now Mali's under a government which is certainly, not very pro French imperialism. Correct?
Exactly. It's a very interesting scenario
Yeah,
that has taken place over the last 13, 14 years. And there's been a lot of turmoil in that region of West Africa. And it goes right back to the interference in the internal affairs of Libya and other countries by the United States and France. And France deployed troops starting in 2013, ostensibly to beat back the insurgents that were taking over areas in the north and central part of the country. Yet they were forced to leave from Mali under the government that exists there now. And there's been fighting that's been taking place, particularly in the north. They have invited in, interestingly enough, Russian military advisors, previously under
interesting.
the Wagner Group, but now it's called the Africa Corps. And they have been helping out in terms of training, supplying weapons, and tactical consultations with the Assimi Goita military government in Mali. So this is a very interesting scenario that is taking place. So the French said they were going to leave and not come back as long as you had Russian advisors and Russian military forces inside of Mali. And so that is the current situation right now. All three of the AAS states, several months ago, went to Moscow for a joint summit between the AES and the Russian Federation. And I wrote on this several months ago. So it's clearly a big shift in terms of geopolitical alliances and also the role of the Russian Federation in the whole process of moving forward in regard to African security as well as economic development. This has caused a lot of consternation on the part of Paris as well as Washington, D.C.
And that's probably why. And that's probably why when French-speaking Africans, like my mother, if they tune into French corporate
Yes.
media or French state media or read the newspapers and the magazines, they're getting a completely call it lies, call it deceptions, call it half truths,
Mm-hmm.
but they're getting a very distorted idea what's going on because they're depicting the current Malayan leader as an out of control dictator who's in bed with Islamists, and
Right.
and this is terrible. His him having good relations or détente with Russia and so
Yeah, right. Because the Russian Federation, even with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the collapse of socialism in Eastern Europe, is still vilified by the corporate media and the establishment. So yes, anything they do is considered negative. And what's interesting is that in recent weeks, with this quote falling out unquote between Trump and the Vladimir Putin administration and government, uh, exposes this scenario that they had set up that somehow the ultra right is more aligned with the Russian Federation than the so-called liberals and centrists that
or
run the United
soft right
States.
and whatnot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So now, okay, you got the ultra right that's in power now in the United States, yet they're still sending arms to Ukraine to fight the Russian Federation. Even Patriot missiles they promised to send Vladimir Zelensky, who was supposed to be somebody who was not allowed to have Patriot missiles. Biden said they didn't need them. And Trump said he was suspending arms transfers from the United States to Ukraine. Now, supposedly that ban on arms shipments has been lifted. We don't know what the ban was really about anyway. It could have been that they're running out of supplies and they have to
yeah.
produce more supplies or transfer supplies from other NATO countries into Ukraine. That could very well be the situation. And also in terms of the state of Israel, they supply a lot of weapons to them as well. And they have been fighting not only the resistance inside of Palestine, but also in Lebanon, as well as Syria, Yemen, and of course, the Islamic Republic of Iran. So they probably suspended the transfers in order to, replenish their stockpiles of weapons so they continue to fight the Russian Federation. But this just exposes, the lies that have been told, about the ultra right in the United States being a close ally of the Russian Federation. It's not about
Exactly.
personalities, it's about strategic interests. And the strategic interests of the United States and the NATO countries conflict with those of the Russian Federation, its allies, and also the People's Republic of China and others.
My second to last question. Because you already answered this question on what can you tell us about Mali and BRICS and any historical relations with some in BRICS, and will it be will that continue to go well depending on if Western imperialism sabotages? So you've already answered that question. So this is my second to last question, which is this. So Mali, like other African countries, notably Congo, DRC, Cape Verde, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and Uganda, has exported to the continent and to the world music as its cultural key or gift to the world. What's been your assessment of musicians like Salif Keita, who also holds French citizenship, I think? What's your assessment of his politics and contributions to culture in Mali and France, and any other musicians you can think of that one should get into that are often overlooked or don't get as much attention as Keita? And presently, for the current millennial generation in Africa and globally, a very popular Malayan artist I like, who's also done some acting, is Fatoumata Diawara. And those who like EDM music probably know a lot of her collaborations with Disclosure and Gorillaz. I'm curious your response.
Well, the music is great. I don't know about their politics because a lot of musicians are very reluctant to come out and take political stands, particularly if you have neo-colonial governments and military governments. It could be quite risky for them. And a lot of them live in European countries because the standard of living is higher.
Yeah.
They do more entertaining, for example, in France and Belgium. and even the UK, and there's a lot more money involved. So yes, but I don't know that much about the politics of Salif Keita, but his music is absolutely great. And Amadou and Mariam, one of whom just died recently, have put out a
Yes, yes,
series
yes,
of
yes.
great
Also great
albums
music.
over the last 2.5 decades. So yes, there's a lot of great musicians that come out of Mali, and one thing they've shown is that the link between West African music, particularly in that region, the so-called Western Sahara region, and the traditional African American folk music of the South, known as the blues. I mean, it's exposed quite quite frankly. The fact that people like John Lee Hooker, who used to live in Detroit, collaborated, with Malian musicians, is really a homecoming
Interesting,
type
interesting.
commemoration. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
believe I believe Martin Scorsese did
yeah. On the blues, yeah.
yes, and he actually and I'm actually really glad that he exposed that you can't celebrate the blues without appreciating the very deep African roots.
Mhm.
That's oh, yeah, so that's quite interesting. Then
Yeah, it is.
last
It is. And it shows the connection. After all these generations, 5 generations of separation, that aspects of African culture have survived in the wilderness of North America. And music is a great example of that. And also food as well is a good example. You could see the similarities in the cuisine, for example, of African Americans in the Southeast and that of people in the western part of Africa, particularly places like Sierra Leone and others. Yeah.
and funnily enough, you're based in Detroit, and of course,
Yes.
and of course, Detroit, home to some of the great soul music of the 1960s. Motown, folks can still visit Motown Records as a museum and so forth. But also, and because this is the period of pride and celebration of the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. The very well, the very early techno music actually comes from Detroit.
Right.
Detroit techno music, and then house music, another form of EDM music, comes from Chicago, Chicago house. I'm a huge fan of Kashmir Green Velvet, who comes from Chicago, but we cannot overlook Detroit in that respect. So when people listen to Fatuma Diwara, and the English, EDM group that she's collaborated with Disclosure, one cannot forget that it was again the Black community, the queer community, the Puerto Rican and Latinx Afro community from the U.S. that gives that music to the world and so forth. So
Yeah,
yeah,
they still have a techno music festival every year in Detroit. They still
really,
have it.
gotta
Yeah,
go
it's
there
been going
then.
on for well over 20 years. It used to be free, like all the festivals. And then in recent years, they've been charging people astronomical amounts of money, but people still show up. And so
Well,
it's,
got,
it's
well,
quite,
well, 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 Abayomi, gotta make plans to come visit you in Detroit. Gotta make
yeah,
plans to go there, and we have to, of course,
check out the
go to Deer.
Electronic
And
Music Festival.
of course, we have to go to Dearborn, Michigan, one of these days.
Of course.
when I do
Yeah,
that visit.
yeah,
Uh, very last question, though. Very last question. I mentioned Salif Keita. So this is my last question about him and Mali. So Salif Keita is also a member of a huge community across Africa, the albino community.
yeah.
I don't know how much. Well, you could be however long or brief you want on this final question. What has historically and presently been the state of affairs for the albino community, not just in Mali but across Africa? I'm curious your
Yeah,
response.
in several countries, they have been they've been subjected to violence, ostracism, and it's related, I think, to superstition, and that somehow or another, because of their pigmentation, that they represent something evil. But I think that's starting to change now in certain countries. I know in Tanzania there have been efforts to reverse that, and in Southern Africa as well. So hopefully these things will disappear. This is my hope that a lot of these beliefs that are based upon superstition, and a lot of it could be inherited from colonialism. I mean, who
Yeah.
knows? A lot of the anti-LGBTQIA plus attitudes were adopted as a result of British and French colonialism.
And in
That
fact,
is the reality with the anti-sodomy laws and all of that, and also the involvement of the right wing as well in trying to
exactly.
influence people on the continent, to be against the LGBTQIA plus community. So we can't ignore the fact that these right wing elements from the West are trying to cause even more division on the continent, the way they've been doing for centuries. We talked about this during the period of the Atlantic slave trade, how they instituted a divide and rule, divide and conquer strategy. It was carried on through colonialism and neo-colonialism. And at this stage of neo-colonialism, it's going to continue in that regard. And that's why you have all these problems in Mali right now in regard to these Islamist groups. Ansar Dine, there are a number of them, Islamic State of West Africa. All these groups are highly suspect. And who's funding them? They're well funded, they're well fed, they have arms, they have vehicles to transport themselves around. So the question is, who's financing these people? And of course, we know from looking at history, there's the US and France and their allies, which are bringing about these groups and causing even further death, destruction, and disintegration in the country. But what I can say about Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger is that they are making progress from the reports I've seen in terms of defeating these Islamist groups. And hopefully that will continue and they can normalize the situation, at least in the Sahel region. But outside the Sahel region, it's very, very difficult because just for example, last week, Trump invited 5 West African leaders to the White House.
Yeah.
And it was so absurd because he's been cutting material aid to these same countries. He asked the president of Liberia, Joseph Boakai, how did he learn to speak English? This is Liberia. Liberia was created by the United States.
Yep.
Like way back in the early and mid 19th century. And they've been very closely allied with the United States for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show that even though they've laid off all these people from the State Department, they laid off like 1,500 of them just last week. Apparently, those people were the ones who developed dossiers and did the briefings for the president when he had foreign leaders coming to the White House. So if those people have been fired, then there's nobody really to brief him on the history of Liberia.
Well, Mr. President, all I can say is you can always do what I do. Just a simple Wikipedia.
Yeah, exactly. And also, other things, like he doesn't know. It's just outrageous that he doesn't know. It comes across as if he doesn't know anything. He says that the kingdom of Lesotho, nobody's ever heard of it. He doesn't know what Congo is, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just so absolutely ridiculous and absurd. But we can see this ultra right-wing MAGA political base is starting to fracture. We saw the departure of Elon Musk, who's now talking about creating another right-wing US party called the America Party.
Yeah.
We've also seen this whole thing around Jeffrey Epstein. Just over the last 24 hours, what has happened with the Wall Street Journal, which is a right-wing publication, reprinted a letter supposedly written by Trump to Jeffrey Epstein for his birthday. Trump said it's fake. He's going to sue the Wall Street Journal. So it is causing divisions because they really don't have any ideological base, ideological orientation. It's all based on hate and resentment, racism, sexism. All of that. That's what their ideology is based on, and that's why they fired the people from the State Department. That's why they've shut down the Agency for International Development, USAID, which is part of the State Department. Um, it's just an amazing situation. They've cut off aid to people for vaccines and for research on HIV and for the distribution of antiretroviral drugs, which treats people who are HIV positive and who have AIDS. So how is this benefiting the U.S. System, the U.S. political system, the U.S. ruling class even? You cannot block off these infections, these viruses, these diseases from coming into the United States without proactive measures. So it's an amazing situation that we're facing right now. So now, they're talking about either shutting down the State Department or laying off and people in the State Department, which they have done. But how are they going to measure what the threats are against the world capitalist system? What measures are they going to use to look at what is actually happening around the world? So it'll be a very interesting future.
Here's hoping that this Trump administration will be a one-term administration. Although
knowing
the Republicans and knowing how far right the Republicans are, I'm sure they'll probably find some kind of a trick to make sure that he can run a third term.
Well, look at this administration. I mean, they have 4 years to put in place restrictions on the right to vote, the right to register to vote in places like Georgia and other key areas in which they won that since them the elections back in November. So who knows what they may try again this time around just to maintain their own authority, maintain their dominance. And what's really amazing is that the people of color communities in the United States are expanding. The populations are rising. So they only have one choice, and that is to institute another form of legalized segregation, Jim Crow, or apartheid in the United States to keep these people out, even of bourgeois politics. That's why they want to expel all the people of Latin American descent in the United States, because they represent approximately 60 million people inside the United States. So, and Haitians, after one generation or even less, they become indistinguishable from African Americans. So it's a very, very interesting development that's taking place inside the United States. I do not believe it will succeed. The contradictions are too sharp, and they may have to resort to even more draconian and drastic measures that could possibly lead to a civil war, another civil war in the United States. But yes, we need to follow what's going on in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, the entire Sahel states. Senegal was one of the countries that was invited here by the White House last week, and which was unfortunate because the current president there, Faye, came to power as a result of a national rebellion inside of Senegal. And he has spoken about possibly putting French troops out of the country. So the question is, what is he doing here, talking to Donald Trump, who is deporting, not just people from Latin America, but they're deporting people of African descent as well. So they're also deporting people who are not necessarily Africans. They may be, to South Sudan. They want to do that to Rwanda, and also to Eswatini, which is formerly the Kingdom of Swaziland. They claim they have deported people to South Sudan as well as Eswatini. This is totally outrageous that these governments would accept people who have been deported from the United States on a racist, illegal basis, to accept them in their countries in exchange possibly for some type of favor from U.S. imperialism. The same U.S. imperialism that has cut aid, that helps people who have ailments, sicknesses, and other forms of economic development. In Lesotho, for example, they have closed off the program they had with the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. They have built textile factories in Maseru that employed over 50,000 people. All those people now have been laid off just because of the Trump administration's policy towards Africa. So these African states, they may want to try to renegotiate some of these agreements, but I don't think they're going to be successful under this current administration.
When will they? When will they ever learn? And as my friend Eve Engler has
Mhm.
has warned, he said regarding the African spring against French neo-colonialism, he warned that while there has been a lot of talk about ousting French neo-imperialism, there's not been much talk about ousting all forms of Western imperialism. So hopefully
Mhm.
they smell that unpleasant coffee quickly. That it's not just France. France is just one head of the Hydra, but it's that whole
Exactly.
pan European imperialism and the
Yeah,
Anglo
because
American
Senegal, for
empire.
example, and Mali, prior to the current period, had very close ties with the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM. They had troops there in Senegal and in Mali. They engaged in joint military exercises with those countries. And interestingly enough, the people who staged those coups in those three AAS countries all had close ties with the US and France, which they broke. So it doesn't mean that the others, which means that the others can break too. Gabon, for example, Nguema, who was a military leader who overthrew the Bongo family, um, was recently elected as president. He came here along with the others last week. He has not said anything about expelling France or the United States. We know Niger had those drone stations there, and they were dismantled by the United States, and they had to take that equipment someplace else. I don't know if they brought it back to the U.S., where they took them to Ukraine or other parts of Africa for that
Yeah,
matter. But the
and
struggle is by no means over, and it's going to continue in the coming months and years.
exactly. And having just watched the docu series on the Iran-Iraq War,
Yes,
just sending a memo out to all of those African heads of state. You cannot trust the West. You
no,
simply cannot trust the West. So
no, they were supporting Iraq during that war because they saw the Islamic Republic as a larger threat during that particular time period. They even sent chemical weapons to the Saddam Hussein government to use against his own people as well as the Iranians. And then they turned right around 3 years later,
yep.
after 1988, and invaded Iraq under the guise of liberating Kuwait.
Also at the same time, also sending weapons to Iran to try to get hostages out of Lebanon, and then using those
Yes,
weapons to continue a genocidal war against the people of Nicaragua and so
yeah. And
forth.
those
So
weapons were owed to them from the previous government of the Shah, which had very close relations with the United States under successive administrations going back to the early 1950s. So that was really, those were their guns. And the same thing with the resources that they have frozen in
but
this
even
country that belong to Iran.
but even with the overthrow of the Shah, some anti-imperialists really don't like it when you mention this. But this is all just historical facts.
Mm-hmm.
The West actually was quite supportive of the rise of Ayatollah Khamenei because they thought that, well, whatever, if the Shah gets overthrown, we'll just continue to do business with Ayatollah Khamenei. But then the moment he started to speak out against Zionism, the moment he said that, like, this isn't just an Iranian
Yes,
revolution, this is a regional revolution, that was when they were like, okay, can't trust this guy, so we have to support Saddam's efforts in overthrowing Ayatollah Khamenei. But even when all of that was going on, they still were sort of having backroom deals. I mean, the
oh
whole
yeah,
sober surprise, the Reagan administration, was working behind the scenes with the Reagan campaign was working behind the scenes with a faction of the CIA and saying to the Islamic Republic of Iran, don't release our hostages of the embassy just yet. Release them only after Reagan gets into power and everything's going to be all hunky dory. So again, to any
yes,
country in the world, whether you're from the far right, the far left, the center left, or a liberal, you cannot trust these Western imperialists. So
yes. And what's going on now with the Russian Federation is just another example. You know, that Trump said he was going to end the war in 24 hours, and he has not done anything. The war is worsening as we speak. The Russians are involved in an offensive right now that's taking out even more Ukrainian territory. So this is why they feel desperate. They have to send these Patriot missiles and other long-range missiles to Ukraine to be used against Russia, which is only going to further prolong the war. But it's not going to change anything fundamentally, in my opinion, on the ground. They have to have troops to come in, and who's going to serve in the Ukrainian army unless they okay the deployment of Polish troops, troops from other parts of Eastern Europe to come in and back Ukraine in their war against the Russian Federation.
And then
We'll
we'll
see if it happens.
and then we'll see if they really do believe in standing with Ukraine, or if they just
Cut
cut
their
and run
losses
and
and
say,
run.
okay, end of the war. That part of
Right.
Ukraine becomes either independent or part of the Russian Federation. But
Mm,
that's that. Well,
right. But Mali is right now moving to try to reclaim its resources. They've arrested top mining executives. They're demanding just compensation for the mining resources that are being stripped out of the country. So this is a good thing. But they have to be very much concerned about their own internal security, whether that's Mali, Burkina Faso, or Niger. They all have to be concerned about their internal security.
well, that's a perfect place to end. We were joined on this All Things Africa edition, learning about the history and current affairs of Mali, with our always wonderful returning champion, historian, journalist, and Pan-Africanist, leftist, and all-around anti-imperialist and support of all people power, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Report. Check out his work and all of his appearances on 1+1. Subscribe to Pan-African Newswire and BAR. Donate generously to them. And don't forget to do the same for 1+1. Donate to us, please. And again, because 1+1, because I'm still having problems sharing my content widely. If viewers and so forth, subscribers and any followers, please share widely all of 1+1's content and encourage others to like us and again share and donate. The next country we'll be exploring is Burkina Faso, but that is going to take place on August the 8th, because next week from July 25th to August 3rd, I'll be on vacation in London. There is going to be an episode next week of 1+1, but that's going to be early in the week, and it's not going to be an episode all about Africa. So again, join us August 3rd. No. Join us August 8th. Next country we'll be exploring is Burkina Faso. I am so
Wonderful.
excited about that. And yes, and until then, folks, have a great weekend. Good night and good luck, and all my best.
Okay.